On October 24, 2011, a back-office reconciliation at MF Global's Chicago operation showed a customer segregated account short by hundreds of millions of dollars. Over the next 72 hours, as ratings downgrades triggered margin calls, funds moved out of accounts that, under Commodity Exchange Act rules, could never legally be touched. By the morning of October 31st, the shortfall in customer money stood at roughly $1.6 billion. This episode does not answer why the firm failed. It answers how a legally impenetrable wall around customer funds was breached in 3 days without any single instruction to steal. Two mechanisms sit at the center of this case: customer segregation and the repurchase-to-maturity trade that pressured it. Start with segregation. Under Section 4D of the Commodity Exchange Act, a futures commission merchant holds customer margin funds in accounts legally separated from the firm's own money. The firm is a custodian, not an owner. It may not use customer funds to finance proprietary positions. The requirement is calculated daily. Total customer funds on deposit must at all times equal or exceed the firm's total obligation to those customers. A shortfall is not a soft violation. It is a per se breach of the rule, regardless of intent. Now, the trade. A repurchase-to-maturity, or RTM, is a financing transaction. The firm sells a bond to a counterparty for cash and agrees to repurchase it. In a standard repo, the repurchase date precedes the bond's maturity. In an RTM, the repurchase date is the bond's maturity date. That single feature is the accounting hinge. Because the repurchase coincides with maturity, the firm argued the transaction was not a financing, but a true sale under the accounting standard then governing transfers, since the firm retained no obligation to buy the bond back before it ceased to exist. The consequence was twofold. First, the RTM moved the sovereign bonds off the balance sheet entirely, removing them from view. Second, and this is the pressure point, the RTM still required the firm to post margin to its counterparties and clearinghouses against the position. The economic exposure remained. Only the accounting exposure disappeared. The firm had built a position that was invisible on paper, but insatiable in cash. The architecture. Beginning in 2010, MF Global accumulated a large proprietary position in the sovereign debt of European peripheral nations: Italy, Spain, Portugal, Ireland, Belgium. The record establishes the net position reached roughly $6.3 billion in face value. The firm financed nearly all of it through repurchase-to-maturity transactions. Step 1. The firm purchased the sovereign bonds. Step 2. It entered RTM agreements, selling the bonds for cash and agreeing to repurchase them at their maturity dates, which fell in 2012. Step 3. Because the repurchase coincided with maturity, the firm booked the transactions as sales, derecognizing the bonds. The position generated income, recognized largely upfront, from the spread between the bond's yield and the firm's financing cost. Hold the disclosure consequence in view first. Because the RTMs were treated as sales, the $6.3 billion in sovereign exposure did not appear as an asset on the balance sheet. It was disclosed eventually in a footnote and in filings. But it did not sit in the line items an ordinary reader of the balance sheet would scan. The firm's leverage and its concentration in European sovereigns were understated by the very accounting treatment the trade was chosen to produce. The second structural feature is the margin mechanism. Under an RTM, The counterparties and the LCH clearinghouse held the right to demand additional margin if the market value of the underlying bonds fell, or if the firm's own creditworthiness deteriorated. This is the critical asymmetry. The accounting said the bonds were gone. The margin agreement said the firm still owed cash against them whenever the market moved. The firm had removed the position from its balance sheet. It had not removed it from its liquidity obligations. Now, the firm's structure. MF Global Holdings sat atop MF Global Inc., the regulated broker-dealer and futures commission merchant that held the segregated customer accounts. The proprietary sovereign position and its financing ran through the firm's own accounts, but the firm's liquidity was pooled and managed centrally. When the broker-dealer's proprietary side needed cash, the treasury operation drew on whatever liquid funds the organization could reach. Here, the two systems collided. As the sovereign crisis intensified through 2011, three forces converged. The market value of the peripheral bonds fell, triggering additional margin calls under the RTMs. The rating agencies moved. On October 24th, Moody's downgraded MF Global. On October 27th, Fitch followed. A downgrade under the firm's financing agreements is itself a margin trigger, and the firm's own reported quarterly loss, plus belated public attention to the $6.3 billion sovereign position, drove counterparties to demand collateral and customers to withdraw funds. The cash drain accelerated step by step. The RTM position demanded margin, the downgrades demanded more, counterparties pulled financing, customers redeemed. The firm's proprietary cash ran out. What remained in the accounts the treasury operation could reach was customer segregated money. The record establishes what happened next in mechanical terms. During the final week, transfers moved out of customer segregated accounts to meet the firm's own obligations, including a broker-dealer clearing shortfall and overdrafts at the firm's banks. Some transfers were characterized internally as intended to be temporary or as corrections of prior errors. The net effect, whatever the characterization, was that the daily segregation calculation went from balance to short by roughly $1.6 billion. The wall had not been demolished. It had been drawn down transfer by transfer. Each one moved funds that Section 4D said could never leave. The detection failure. Consider what the verification chain was supposed to catch. Segregation is verified daily by the firm itself and reported to regulators. The firm files a daily segregation statement. This is the primary control, and it is a self-report. The regulator, the CFTC, and the exchange self-regulatory bodies rely on the accuracy of the firm's own daily computation. As long as the firm reported itself in compliance, the reported number showed a wall intact. The control depended on the honesty and accuracy of the party being controlled. The auditors and the balance sheet present the second gap. The RTM accounting was, on the record, applied under the standard governing sale accounting for transfers of financial assets. The treatment was disclosed. This is the structural point analysts missed for months. The sovereign position was not hidden in the sense of being concealed from the filings. It was disclosed in a form that removed it from the balance sheet totals. An analyst reading leverage ratios off the face of the balance sheet would not see $6.3 billion of sovereign exposure, because the accounting had legitimately, by the standard then in force, taken it off. Detection required reading the footnotes, reconstructing the off-balance sheet position, and then understanding that RTM margin obligations were a live liquidity claim rather than a closed sale. The rating agencies did eventually act, but their action was the trigger, not the early warning. For detection to have occurred earlier, one of two things would have had to be true. Either the segregation self-report would have had to be independently reconciled in near real time by an outside party with authority to see every account, which the system did not provide. Or the market would have had to price the RTM position as a live, margin-generating liquidity exposure rather than a completed sale, which the accounting treatment specifically discouraged. Neither condition held. The verification chain assumed the balance sheet told the truth about exposure. It assumed the daily segregation report told the truth about custody. Both assumptions were structurally, not merely accidentally, defeated by the instruments in use. The unraveling. The sequence is precise. On October 25th, MF Global reported its quarterly loss and its regulatory capital position, drawing analyst and press attention to the sovereign holdings. The Moody's downgrade of October 24th and the Fitch downgrade of October 27 moved the firm to the edge of investment grade. Financing counterparties tightened. Margin demands climbed. The firm sought a buyer over the final weekend. On the night of October 30th, during due diligence for a potential sale to Interactive Brokers, the acquirer's review of the books surfaced the segregation shortfall. The deal collapsed. There is no covering a hole of that size in a custodial account. On October 31st, MF Global Holdings filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy. The broker-dealer was placed into liquidation under the Securities Investor Protection Act, and a SIPA trustee was appointed. A separate Chapter 11 trustee was appointed for the holding company. The enforcement record establishes the outcome. The CFTC brought an action arising from the unlawful use of customer segregated funds and the failure to maintain segregation. MF Global Inc. and its holding company were held liable for the misuse of customer money and for failing to supervise. The record established that customer segregated funds were used to meet the firm's own liquidity needs during the final days, in violation of Section 4D and the segregation regulations. The settlements imposed restitution of the full customer shortfall and civil monetary penalties. Over the course of the liquidation, the SIPA trustee ultimately returned 100% of the customer property claims. The $1.6 billion shortfall was made whole through recovery and litigation, not through any reserve the firm had held. The findings. This case establishes three structural propositions about the mechanism. First, daily customer segregation is only as strong as the self-report it depends on. When a firm's central treasury can reach segregated accounts and the compliance number is computed by the same firm, the wall is procedural, not physical. Second, the repurchase-to-maturity trade demonstrated how sale accounting can remove economic exposure from a balance sheet while leaving the cash obligation fully alive. The gap between accounting derecognition and liquidity risk is where the pressure built. Third, liquidity failure and custodial failure are not separate events in a firm that pools its cash. The margin calls on an off-balance sheet position drained the proprietary resources first. Then they reached the funds that law had walled off. The CFTC amended its customer protection rules as a direct result. The revised regime imposed a residual interest requirement, tighter limits on how customer funds may be invested and held, and, most consequentially, the requirement that a senior officer certify daily that no customer funds have been improperly withdrawn. The certification converts the self-report from a clerical output into a personal attestation. The mechanism did not change. The signature on it did.